Hello everybody, my name is Greg Cooper. I'm a LinkedIn coach and trainer based in Bristol, in the UK, and this is one of a series of interviews and case studies I'm doing with my connections and clients. And we're looking at LinkedIn experiences, LinkedIn successes, LinkedIn challenges, and what can be learned from those. Today I'm really delighted to have Felix Spender with me. Felix is going to share with us a story about an article he wrote on LinkedIn back in May. I'm not going to tell you the title at the moment, but very interesting results from that, including a lost weekend, which I think Felix will be mentioning to you in a moment. So this is going to be about roughly 15 minutes, the interview. I'm going to ask Felix to introduce himself now and explain to you what his business does and the sort of businesses he works with. Felix, over to you.
Greg, good morning. Thanks for that. I'm Felix Spender. I'm a former soldier turned professional peacemaker, and I now run a conflict management consultancy. And if I put that in context, every business, if it wants to survive, compete, and flourish, needs to be able to be agile, to adapt to the marketplace conditions. It needs to be able to accept regular change. It needs to innovate and develop. And in order to do that, it needs to have high-level cooperation amongst its people. And that cooperation gets broken down when lines of conflict develop. And therefore, what we do is we help companies remove the lines of conflict and deal with them in a way that works for the long term. And we do that through a method that we call constructive conflict management. So that's what we do.
Great. And what geography do you work in? What sort of areas do you cover?
We've got a good footprint down in the southwest. We've got a developing footprint in London, and we're now starting to operate in overseas markets. So we've got a fledgling footprint in Dubai, bit of work going on in India. We're now just sort of developing into Denmark, where we're starting to pick up some work on mergers and acquisitions.
Fantastic. So it's very appropriate we start to talk about, introduce Europe into the conversation, because Felix's article is all about Brexit. I'm just going to bring the article up onto the screen in a moment. And right now, I think you can see that, can you, Felix?
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So this is the article. It's called Why Britain Will Vote for Brexit. Fantastic title. And importantly, it was written in May. As you may know, that if you're British, you'll know the referendum was in June, but this article was written in May. And I'm just going to ask Felix to tell us a little bit about the article, first of all, what it was about.
This article was about the underlying reasons why, in my opinion, Britain was going to vote to leave the European Union. And it had nothing to do with the economics or the politics or anything else. It was to do with the human approach to the various conflicts that had occurred in Europe. And so what triggered this was that I was I'm starting to write our first book on the subject now, and I was trying to get my thoughts in order as to why conflict arises, and we came up with the three needs: the need to be heard, the need to be valued, and the need to have control. And when I looked at this in the context of the Brexit debate, I recognized that actually all those three issues were missing. And therefore, there was a very strong probability, in my opinion, that people would rebel. And that's what happened.
So it had a rather interesting impact. I think you had a slightly disrupted weekend, didn't you, Felix?
I write blogs. I try and write blogs on a monthly basis, and following your advice, Greg, I think you said put them out on a Wednesday evening, which is what I tended to do, which I did for this one. I wrote it quite quickly, actually in 40 minutes, put it out and posted it, and the next day went off for a long weekend with my wife in Northumberland, where we were staying in a cottage in the middle of nowhere that had precious little Wi-Fi connection. And by the time we got in the car and driven up there and I got a connection and I looked at this, I was overwhelmed by the amount of alerts coming in on my phone. And I think at that stage it had 4,000 reads. and a number of comments. And I was rather shocked, actually, because I'm quite used to getting, 150, 200, but 4,000 was quite off the scale for me.
Yeah, so we can see down here that, Felix has got, the article's got 736 likes on it. It's got 136 comments, huge number of comments, and it's been shared 119 times. What was the final viewing figures, Felix?
It has come out just under 9,000. So I hoped it would get over hit 9,000, but it's just under.
Yeah, yeah. And it still has a lifetime, doesn't it? I mean, I've written articles that are still getting a couple of hundred views every week, which I wrote 2 years ago. So, I mean, I'm sure you're going to get up to 10,000 with this article.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean,
how did you manage your response? Because so you got all these responses, got all these comments coming in. How did you respond to that? How did you manage all those comments that people were making on the?
I then had to conduct the weekend around where I could get a Wi-Fi signal so that I could respond to the comments. Yeah. And some of the comments weren't particularly useful or interesting. And I mean, I did my best to reply to them. But actually, what we started to get was some quite nice discussion going on, because some of the comments were, people who were genuinely interested, genuinely concerned, genuinely thought it was a different outlook on what was going on. And with those people, you started to have a sort of dialogue, and I was quite clear we had to keep the dialogue balanced. So I wasn't taking a position as to whether it was right or wrong. I was merely saying this was my prediction based on my professional understanding of the problem. But we kept the balance going, and I suppose what I hoped was that in some way it might influence the higher level discussion, but of course it didn't.
Well, I was really impressed by, first of all, the number of comments and interactions that you got on the article, but also the diversity. You were getting comments from senior people in the States, in Europe, in the UK, and also by the quality of the conversation. I know you mentioned there were a few sort of slightly aberrant comments, but there were very few, for this type of discussion. I was very impressed by it. I think part of that was that you actually took the time to respond very carefully and thoughtfully to people's comments on your article. I mean, it must have taken you a lot of time to do that.
Yeah, it took a lot of time, and I worked off my phone, so all I could do it on was my phone, and it irritated my wife no end. But what was interesting is, as you say, some of it was a really good discussion, and there was a proper exchange of views and people starting to look at the problem from a slightly different angle. And I think, there was just a little bit of shifting perceptions, which when I look at a lot of the LinkedIn discussions, actually it's quite black and white. It's quite, there's not a huge dialogue there at times, but this was nice because we were actually able to talk about perceptions and how people looked at the problem from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, I think that was very interesting because, as you say, quite often on a discussion on social media, people just posting their opinions, but people were engaging with each other on the thread, and the conversation was beginning to evolve, and people were taking up different positions and listening to each other, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting thing, and it's the only. I've had other discussions like that on LinkedIn, but the way it ran and developed just made it interesting to be part of. So when I engaged with people, I didn't feel it was a chore, but it was generally to get the discussion going was actually very satisfying.
Yeah. And what results have actually come from it? It was a very nice surprise. And you got fantastic engagement on the article. What are the tangible results and perhaps the less tangible results that you feel have come from the particular article?
I think if I take the tangible side, I mean, we have picked up a piece of work on the back of it through quite a sort of reasonably well-placed organisation, simply because someone read that article, liked what we'd written, liked the approach, and said, can you come and talk to us about X and Y? So that's been good. I think it's done a lot for my credibility. I think in terms of showing that you're someone who can have a really grown-up discussion about something you know about is very important. So I think credibility is very important. And I think it's brought in, it's widened my contacts, because people wanted to connect to me from all over the world, which is good. But within those new connections, there are some actually that are quite well placed for me. So that's been useful. And I think it's also shown me the power of LinkedIn, that if you get it right, actually you can get your message to places where you never thought you could get it. And I was surprised, because it was very, quite high-powered people in banking, finance, politics, all these sorts of areas that I would struggle to get into on a daily basis, and then suddenly you're having a dialogue and connected to them.
How do you think that writing this article and the response to it has changed the way that you think and use LinkedIn now?
I sort of have two approaches to LinkedIn. I use it with a broad brush approach. So when I'm sharing people's stuff, commenting on stuff, liking stuff, I see that very much as a broad brush approach. And I think that's good, because that keeps your profile up. People are seeing you active, and I think that's good. But what I've also learned, that it can be a very targeted a very targeted medium. And if I take a subsequent blog that I wrote about the issues on Southern Rail, now that's only had I think 200 reads, but actually it was written specifically to get in front of one person, and I achieved that. And so that has done what I needed it to do.
I think that's very interesting. It's not always about the views, and the way that you've targeted that particular article, I think is fascinating, actually, and I think that will be a bit of a revelation to some people.
Yeah. Well, it's taken me 2 or 3 years to sort of work this out.
Yeah.
But it's now, I've learned it can be, you can use it broad brush, because everything goes out on your connections, and it's good that way. But you can also be highly, you can target individuals with it if you want to.
And I suppose one thing we should also mention for people that aren't familiar with this is that one of the reasons why the article took off as it did was because it was featured in one of LinkedIn's channels. LinkedIn has about 40 different channels. If your article is lucky enough to be featured in those, then it'll be promoted by LinkedIn. Felix's article was featured in the banking and finance channel, wasn't it, Felix, I believe? Yeah. So unfortunately, we don't have control over whether our articles are featured. There are 3 ways that an article will be featured. One is the algorithm picks it up and notices that people are engaging with it, and it's a popular article, and it will then recognize what the subject is and put it in the appropriate channel. Secondly, LinkedIn have 25 editors all around the world who are looking for interesting articles, so if an editor can pick it up, they can also put it in the channel. And the third way is if you happen to work for LinkedIn and be a writer, then you get special access to the channels, but that doesn't apply in this case. So that's been really interesting. I think it's fantastic what you've done with that article. And it all came from, really goes back to this thing about quality content. I mean, I would very much struck me as I was reading through the comments on the article, how many people actually complimented you, Felix, on the quality of the article and how well written it was. So that's still a key factor here.
I think
that's my 15-minute reminder.
Okay.
So
I think what was interesting about this is that sometimes when I write articles, you do labour over them. You're trying to get it right, and you labour. This one was surprising. Well, it wasn't surprising, but it took me literally 45 minutes to write and post. And the reason for that was that it sat. The subject was quite clear. The subject knowledge sat absolutely at my fingertips to write.
Yes.
I didn't have to think about it. It just came out.
Just came.
And it was exactly the right time.
Yes.
And that was fluke more than anything else.
Yes.
Exactly the right time.
Yeah, I'd say yes. So timing is obviously key. You chose a great topic and an excellent headline. The headline is the main thing that your connections will see when LinkedIn puts it in the notifications box. So headline's really important, and I really like the image that you chose for that. So when people click on the article, they see that great cartoon image. So no, that's very interesting. Felix, thanks very much for spending some time with me today and telling me the story about the article and your experience of that and what results it's had. And I look forward to hearing more about subsequent successes that have come from the article and further articles in the future. Thank
Brilliant.
you for joining me.
Thank you. I look forward to telling you about it.
Great.